For this project, I want to draw a 3D cube. It starts out with a square, and then I add these slanted lines to give me the third dimension, and then I'll add some shading. Now here's a video that I made while using a program called SketchUp, and then we'll come back and do the drawing. What I want to show about this box is that it has a highlight side, a mid-tone side, shadow, and a cast shadow. Each side gets a little bit different amount of light. This gets the most light because the light is overhead and slightly to the front. The mid-tone gets a good bit of light from the environment, that is, light that reflects back to it from the objects around it. The shadow side gets less light, although it does get some from the environment around it. It doesn't get as much. The cast shadow is created by the box blocking the light from reaching this surface in the same amount that it reaches the rest of the shelf. If I turn this around, you can see that the shelf has the same characteristics. It has a highlight side, a mid-tone side, a shadow side, and a cast shadow, which in this case is on the simulated brick wall. If I turn this until you look down on the top, and that shadow is a ground shadow, by the way, you can see that once again we have a square. Let me angle that around. Once again we have a square. You can see the cast shadow. You can see the parallel lines of the shelf, the parallel lines of the sides of the box. But as I rotate this up, these two lines now appear to slant back, and so do these. And if you followed these lines all the way back, they would meet at one point. That's 1 point perspective. If I turn the box around, these lines go back to 1 point over here. These two lines go back to 1 point over here, and that's 2 point perspective. But this is not really about 1 point and 2 point perspective. It's about shadows, but I just thought I would mention that since I've got the model up and it's easy to see from this angle of view. Perspective, by the way, means angle of view. In my opinion, this is the best angle of view because you can see a good bit of three sides and it's easy to understand the object. In my opinion, it's easier to understand than when you're just looking at it like this. And in this modeling program, I could turn it all the way around until you can actually see the back side a little bit. Now, when I sketch this with a pencil, I am going to darken the cast shadow just a little bit to make it more distinct from this shadow here. Alright, now for the drawing. You can follow along with that, or you can just watch the video. I don't know what your situation is, but if you have your drawing paper and pencil ready, you can follow along. It's really not hard to do. Now we're going to simplify this. We're not going to get too carried away with perspective. There would be some perspective lines, but we're just going to keep it simple. So I'm going to start with the square in the middle. Now if you don't have a ruler, you can fold a piece of paper a couple times, and that'll give you a nice straight edge if you want to keep it nice and neat and straight. Now just sketching will be fine. And it doesn't have to be a perfect square. Because rectangles would be shaded the same way. But I'm going to use my straight edge and straighten these up just a little bit. It can just be scrap paper if you don't have access to any other straight edge. And I'm just doing this to make the lines a little more bold and easier to see. Now in reality, these lines would not all be parallel. Since I'm showing two other sides, they would be in perspective. But once again, I'm simplifying this to make it easier to understand. All right, the first thing I need to do is get some slanted lines off of 3 corners, and I'm going to slant about that much. Now this one, I'm going to get that slant into my head by just practicing that, and I'm going to go over here. But when I make it over here, if you slant a little bit too much that way, that's okay, because that's the way it really would be. But if you match that slant, that'll work, because the perspective would cause these to go back to a single point, which is 1 point perspective, but we're not really going to deal with that right now. Make that longer, because when you bring your line from this corner down and this, or across, whichever way you've got your paper turned, it needs to be parallel to this line. Even in perspective, that would still be parallel. I made it longer so that I can just chop off the extra piece. That works best for me. Whatever works best for you is fine with me. All right, I'm going to straighten up that line a little bit. And I've got to make that slant one more time. So I'm going to go down here, get that slant into my head, get the feel for that line, and then I'm going to sketch it longer. I'm going to sketch it longer. Now I'm bringing down the parallel line. One reason it's important to learn to do shading is because it gives your work a more natural appearance. And it allows you to add depth to your picture. It keeps it from just being flat. Now, if you can understand shading on a cube and a cylinder, a pyramid, and a sphere, then you can use what you know about shading on many, many, many other projects, because pretty much everything is some combination of those basic shapes. Even freeform, you can fit those shapes in there on many occasions. All right, now I'm going to draw that table. See, I'm just going to stretch that line out that way and a little bit this way. And then I am going to draw the shelf or the table in perspective a little more. It will help it to look like it's sitting on something flat. Doesn't have to be real fancy. I'm going to angle this in just a little bit more so I can show that edge. Now, vertical lines are always vertical, no matter what perspective or angle of view. The vertical lines remain vertical, and the horizontal lines remain horizontal. The lines that appear to change directions, that is, the lines that appear to slant, are the one that go off into the distance. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. I like to keep my work neat as much as possible. And you can see too how I'm just doing a makeshift straight edge, and I've got many rulers. I've got all kinds of instruments to help me with drawing things neatly, especially things straight and round. I've got CAD programs and compasses and all kinds of things to help with that, but I like to just sketch too. Okay, clean this up a little bit and we'll start the shading. Now on the front, you're going to put some shading. This is just shaded in solid. We're going to use hatch lines, and it'll give the same effect. We're not going to do anything to the top. We're just going to leave it plain. We're going to darken this time with cross hatch lines, and then we'll do the cast shadow. And I realize now that I haven't drawn that cast shadow yet, so let me go ahead and get that in there. Just turn the paper around. Now, if you're following along, just do the best you can with it. And if you're not following along, well, I hope you learned something just by watching. But I honestly hope that you are doing this with me. Okay. Now for the hatching. Hatching is simple in that you just put lines across. I'm going to go fairly slow.
so that I can keep it neat. Now if you draw these real dark and bold, it's just going to look like you have a pattern on the face of this cube or box. Now it would be perfect if I could keep those nice and neat and parallel and evenly spaced, and I could if I took more time or used a straight edge. But I just want to show the effect that we just darkened in that side some. We could darken it in more by crossing over with widely placed hatch lines like that. And then over here we would use darker hatch lines, and we would put them very close together because this side's going to be darker. Now we could shade this. We could use just flat shading and just fill that in and get it as dark as we need to. But I like using the hatch lines, especially on a project like this, because when you do flat shading, it's a little bit hard to control, and a lot of times that only works well if you can blend it. So I like hatching on projects like this, illustrations that is. Alright, this time I'm going to hatch this way, and I'm going to turn it and go over this way. Now you can hatch several different directions. And right up against the block or the cube, the box, whatever you want to refer to it as, you can just fill in the shading. I like to make the cast shadow a little bit darker, especially right up against the edge like this. Okay, it's just a simple illustration of drawing in 3D by adding simple hatch shading. So here's the model I did in SketchUp in 3D, and I did darken that. In the model, these two were the same, but I don't like that. I made that darker in a CAD program, in another program. And if you can understand how to add the shading to cubes, it works for rectangles, then learn to shade spheres, which I'll make videos on that, cylinders, pyramids. Putting those together, you can come up with some very realistic illustrations. And now I have a time-lapse video of me drawing some other geometrical shapes, and I'll play you some music, and I hope you enjoy the video.